welcome into the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. We're going to start with the battle between Florida State and the ACC. Feels like a very ongoing battle in the court system to see if Florida State can get out of the ACC a little bit earlier than the ACC would like. And then we will get into what seems to be somewhat of a problem in the college football coaching world. A lot of coaches moving to the NFL, a lot of coaches finding their way to the SEC or Big Ten. I will get into all of that. And then we will get into the best coaching hires of this cycle. There have been a couple that I felt have stood out above the pack, so I will break down those. And then finally, we have our very first Top 10 Tuesday today, and I have obviously started with my top 10 teams for the 2024 season, my way too early, as they say, top 10. A couple of surprises in there, so let me know what you think in the comments. But before we start, I do want to bring to your attention, we have a ton of different tips or different questions that come in throughout the show, and the best way for us to see those and to answer those effectively is to use the link at the bottom of the screen, streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. It's a huge help not only to us, but to you all to see your questions on the screen and get answered as quickly as possible. So definitely use that if you would like to leave a question. But let's jump right in. The ACC and Florida State are currently battling in the court system. Obviously, you have definitely heard murmurs of this if you've been following college football at all, but it's a very complex issue, and I'll be totally honest, I've been a little bit confused when looking at different stuff around it, but I'm not a lawyer, so let's try to break this down as simply as possible and let you guys know what you need to know about this issue. I think the important thing to know is, first of all, when this all started, and the real answer to that is obviously when a lot of stuff started for Florida State on the day that the playoff rankings were revealed a year ago. I think a lot of people around Florida State took stock of a lot of different things right around then, and I think especially being left out for a team like Alabama, who wasn't an undefeated team and was in the SEC. I think there were a lot of people at Florida State that kind of saw somewhat of a writing on the wall that the SEC or the Big Ten are always going to get preferential treatment over smaller conferences, or at least that's how they have felt. So they decided they wanted out of the ACC. They had seen all these other teams take their opportunity to get to the SEC, Texas and Oklahoma joining this year, and then you got the Big Ten adding USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington. So they see all these teams finding their way to a better conference and say they want a piece of that. So they decided then that they were going to sue the ACC to get released from their grant of rights. Now the grant of rights is mainly their media rights deal with the ESPN that they signed in 2016 that runs all the way through 2036. Now this is a very, very long media rights deal, especially in today's age of college football. They definitely do shorter term contracts because the amount of money in media today changes very drastically, especially in the sports space. So it is a little bit insane that this is that long term of a contract, but that's the way it's set up currently. In Florida State would have to pay just an insane amounts of money to get out of that contract. There have been different numbers thrown around. I've seen anything up to about $525 million all the way down to about $400 million that they would have to pay currently to get out of the ACC. They are obviously arguing that this is an absurd number and cannot be the actual impact of Florida State leaving the conference. So that is currently what they're battling over. And one of the big contentious area points, at least recently, has been where will this case take place. I think currently it is set to take place in North Carolina, but Florida State is fighting tooth and nail to have it fought in Florida, which makes total sense. Obviously, you want to be on your home turf when arguing a case like this, and the ACC the same. So they want to be in North Carolina where their headquarters are. Florida State wants to be in Florida, which makes sense from both sides. And I think one of the big things to keep in mind here is throughout all of conference realignment, throughout of all of this, craziness over the last couple of years, all it's really taken is a couple of people at a school or at an organization wanting a change, right? So Texas and Oklahoma, when they made that decision to jump over to the SEC, they made that decision. There was no one that was going to get in their way of making that decision, I guess is the best way to put this. When, people with the amount of money that Texas and Oklahoma have, or in this case, Florida State have, and the people with as much, influence and power over the sport that Florida State and Texas and Oklahoma and all of these teams that have moved around over the last couple of years have had, they're going to find a way to move. So I think that's something to keep in mind here. I think a little selfishly, I wish the ACC would kind of win and be able to keep Florida State around because for the sport, I think it is in its best interest to be different, to be regional, to be have Florida State, fighting it out with Miami in their own conference, and that's still a possibility. Just them not in the ACC anymore. So I'm a big fan of the Power Five conferences, the classic setup that we've had for a really long time now. But that's obviously coming to an end to a certain extent, and it could change even more with this addition to the mix because. Let's be totally honest, if Florida State finds a way to pull this off, there's other teams in the ACC that will follow suit very quickly. It should come as no surprise to anyone that Clemson is following this very, very closely. So is North Carolina, so is Virginia, Miami, even Georgia Tech. There's tons of teams across the ACC that are watching this very closely because if the ACC loses, there's a chance that, all these other teams come out of the woodwork very quickly and say, well, if Florida State's getting a better deal down the road, why can't we? And they will definitely find a way to probably finagle their way out of the conference as well. But I don't think they necessarily mind Florida State being the people out in front of this right now. Obviously, Florida State, the topic of conversation around the sport for a really long time now. Obviously, Michigan winning the title was the biggest deal for a time. Nick Saban retiring, there have been tons of different stories, but Florida State has been tied into pretty much every story since the end of college football season, even going back to that playoff selection show. It has been the Florida State show in a lot of ways, and you do wonder, I guess, in this craziness that is going on around them, can Florida State, the football team, just sit down and totally lock in on the season? We talked about it yesterday. Spring practice is going to be very, very important for them. They got to get DJ Uiagalelei underway. They have to get him ready to go, and there's a lot of stuff riding on that. So with all of this stuff happening around them, obviously Mike Norvell, an elite coach, an elite motivator of his guys, so I'm not necessarily worried about his ability to get his guys focused and get his guys prepared. But this is an extra distraction to deal with. There is that added element of all of those players going into, whether it's their freshman, sophomore, or junior season, thinking, am I going to be playing in the ACC after this year? Or am I going to be playing around my home area in a lot of ways? So a lot of change is definitely coming in the college football world. We've seen that over the last couple of years, started with Texas OU, obviously, and has really snowballed since then. But the question for the ACC is, if you lose this, what happens next? We've talked about the other teams that are watching this very closely, and if you're the ACC, you could very well look like the Pac-12 in a couple of years here. We talked about it yesterday. It happens very quickly. George Kliavkoff is officially out as the Pac-12 commissioner, and it's because he wasn't able to keep his teams around. He wasn't able to get a media rights deal that made them happy enough to continue to be in the conference, and I think that's something that the ACC is going to have to look at and really take stock of, because it happens very quickly. He was hired in 2021, George Kliavkoff, and has been fired less than 3 years later and has lost 10 teams in the process. So It's something that the ACC is going to have to be very cognizant of, and in the coming month or so, they're going to have to, really buckle down and, for their sake, win this case, because if Florida State wins, which I'm not necessarily at I'm not sure which way this is gonna go. I'm no law expert or anything like that, but I tend to believe that Florida State will find a way out. I talked about it before. Motivated people with a lot of money in the sport tend to find a way to get their way in a lot of ways. So I think Florida State will find a way. I think it will be some type of settlement between, the crazy $400 million figure and Florida State's ideal scenario, which is leave for free and find their way to the SEC or the Big Ten and go on their merry way. But it will be interesting to see what those numbers are. Obviously, it'll be interesting to see not only what happens in this court case, but also, let's say Florida State does find a way to win and get their way out of a conference, who's willing to take them on. They have created a lot of storylines in college football, have, I don't want to say made a lot of enemies, but there have been a lot of people that haven't been necessarily super happy with Florida State in the last little bit, whether that's the College Football Playoff Committee or whoever else, the ACC currently. But I wonder, will the SEC jump at this chance to have a team like Florida State, which I think fits really well into the niche of the SEC, or will they say it's not really worth having this team that has created a lot of publicity and sometimes negative publicity around them? Now, if I was in the SEC conversations, I'd say let's take Florida State and not bat another eye, but that is something to think about, because there are two real conferences that everyone wants to be in, and if one of those two doesn't take you, where are you left, kind of? So it'll be interesting to see how that develops for sure. But currently the battle is set for March 22nd in North Carolina. So buckle up. The last two off seasons have been littered with conference realignment. I don't think this is going to be any different. I think Florida State will win this battle, and then the floodgates might just open on the ACC. But we will absolutely be tracking that more as it goes along. Will probably be a relatively long process. It's already taken a couple of months here since they've sued and countersued. So it'll be interesting to see how all of this develops. But we will keep you up to date with that. But we're going to take a short break here before we get to somewhat of a coaching crisis in college football right now. But we're going to take a short break, and we will be